With this, we welcome you to this event as an extended family of nice Nepal.
Wow, that was a very impressive introduction to NICE. I need not say any more about it. So, welcome everybody to the International Studies Convention 2021, organized by the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement. Um, it is really a pleasure to kind of see you all trying to kind of attend this discussion and kind of get to know more about what future holds for South Asia. And it's really a privilege for me to introduce a very versatile and accomplished writer, speaker, leader, and visionary, Mr. Aakar Patel. Mr. Patel serves as a chair of the Amnesty International India. Before he was the executive director of Amnesty International India, he was a powerful force defending the rights of the people and really igniting the moral consciousness among people. Before that, Mr. Patel was the editor of various publications where he always brought in innovative ideas to change the way how information was served to people and helping people to really to think think out of the box. Mr. Patel is most famous as a widely read columnist, controversial at times, but always thought-provoking. His intelligence, his objectivity, and vision is evident in every word he writes. If you ever follow his Twitter feed, you could have some good humor while he makes you think about political and socioeconomic issues. The reason why I always follow him is because he always challenged status quo, not for the sake of challenging it, but really to kind of, he thinks distinctly and really help us kind of see things from various angles. And it is so important to have that in today's world. So if this is something you enjoy, my friends, you are here for a treat. You have the opportunity to listen to a true visionary and visionary, Mr. Aakar Patel. The floor is yours, Mr. Patel.
Thank you very much. That was very kind. Thank you to all of you at NICE. Thank you to all of those of you who are logged in and listening in. I'm going to speak about three broad things, two of which have to do with the immediate past and the present and what it is that we are going through. These two parts have to do specifically with India, which is my area of study. It has been for my last book and is for my next book as well. The third part is forward-looking, and we can talk about what the future for this region is over the next quarter century. So I have a thesis, and thesis has two vectors to it. One is that India's failure to arrive and the end of the India growth story. For a couple of decades, it was felt that India would be the next China in terms of becoming the factory to the world, to be able to emulate what the Chinese have done on the side of the economy, which is to take their per capita GDP, which not so long ago was pretty much the same as ours, to about 6 times ours now. And they are on the cusp of leaving what is called the middle income status, while we are at the bottom rung of that ladder. India's per capita income at the moment in dollars is about 2,000 a year. China's is about 6 or 7 times that. And as some of you who may have been following the news may know, we have gone back. We have regressed in the last couple of years, especially noticeably so, having gone back behind Bangladesh in per capita GDP terms. But the decline in Indian economic power and the sort of ending of the India growth story happened before that. So GDP data in India has been sequentially negative since the beginning of 2018. That's what the government data says. So for 2 years, 8 quarters before COVID, 9 quarters actually, if we include the Jan to March quarter of 2020, for 9 quarters, GDP fell in sequential terms. But the government's own economic advisor and several other indicators show that India's growth has probably been overstated by 2.5 percentage points over the last decade or so. So when India claimed that it was the fastest growing economy in the world for a very brief period, it may not have been the case that that was true. India doesn't have good data. One of the problems we have is that a large part of the economy sits in what is called the informal sector, for which we don't have any means of collecting data. So what is done is the formal sector's data is gathered, which is about half of the total economy, and then it is assumed that the informal sector is growing at that same pace, which may or may not be the case. But data that has been coming out now shows that the India growth story is over, and the joblessness, which is not a problem that we had, has been on the rise. In fact, fewer people are working or looking for work today in 2021 than was the case in 2013. So in 13, the workforce was 44 crore, that's 440 million people. Today it's 38 crore, that's 380 million people. So it's shrunk from 440 to 380 million. This is the number of people who are either employed or are looking for work. India has one of the lowest labor force participation rates in the world. So China's is about 75%. We don't know if that data is accurate. Indonesia and Thailand, it's about 70%, just short of that. The US is about 62%. India is 40%. So India has a very large number of people who are either not working or not looking for work. And the only third option is that they could be studying. This is the age group 15 and above. But we know that it's not true that they are studying, because after secondary school, there's not that many people who go through college. So what was supposed to be a demographic dividend, which is the time in your country's history and its life when you have a larger working population than a younger one, we are actually losing jobs and losing people from the labor force. So what is called a demographic disaster is what we are going through right now. The numbers, both from the side of the government and from the side of the private sector that does this research, seem to align. So there is not that much confusion, nor is there a difference in the set of facts that we will go through. The Indian middle class has stopped growing since 2014. So if you look at residential sales in the 8 major cities, Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Chennai, Delhi, Hyderabad, Calcutta, Bombay, and Pune, they've remained stagnant at about 3.3 lakh units. That's 330,000 units between 2012 and 2019. Last year, it fell to about half that. But the larger point is that for the 7 years between 2012 and 2019, they didn't grow at all, which is not a good sign. The unsold inventory is about 3 times that. Passenger vehicle sales, which is the sales of cars, has remained stagnant for a decade. So there is about 27 lakh cars sold in 2012. That's 2.7 million cars. 27, the same number sold in 2019, and the same number sold in 2020. So there's no growth, it's totally flat. Two-wheeler sales, which would indicate that the poor are coming into the middle class and are getting their own form of transportation, have been stagnant at 1.6 crore. That's 16 million in 2014, 17 million in 2019, and 15 million last year. So it's actually fallen from the number that it was 7 years ago. Three-wheeler sales, we use a lot of three-wheelers. They're called rickshaws here, tuk-tuks in Thailand. 500,000 sales in 2012, 500,000 in 2015, 500,000 in 2016, 600,000 in 2019, and 200,000 last year. So on commercial vehicle sales have also gone down more than cars and two-wheelers. And commercial vehicles are those trucks and minivans that are used to transport the goods of the economy. So losing sales there tells us something about the larger picture of GDP in India. What else? So jobs in manufacturing have halved from 5.1 crore, that's 51 million, to 2.7 crore or 27 million in a period of the Modi years. So we had this big campaign called Make in India, where we were supposed to replicate the success of China through setting up manufacturing, which is quite weak in most parts of India. But what has happened is we've lost the capacity to add jobs, and it appears that we are losing jobs there at a pace which is not sustainable. Merchandise exports have shown no growth since 2014, so they've been flat. It is also true that the world's exports have remained flat in this period, but countries that have sought to use advantages that they have locally have actually done well. Bangladesh and Vietnam being two of them. So Bangladesh and Vietnam have increased their share of the world trade in the same period where we have remained flat. Garment exports, which is a very important category because lots of women work in it. It's a very low skill, high labor intensive a business where you can get very large numbers of people to work and to get them employed. Women tend to find this space comfortable because they are with other women, mostly working in a very large room where they're sewing garments and so on. Our share of garments exports globally has gone down from 6% to 3% since 2014. So we were at 6% of the total global trade in garments. Now it's 3%. Government data that came out in 2018 but was suppressed by the government, and then the government said that it did not want to release the data, said that Indians were consuming less in 2018 than they were in 2012. So what they were spending on food went down from 643 rupees per person per month in 2012 to 580 rupees per person per month in 2018. So when this survey was leaked to a newspaper, the government chose to say that it was on hold because it needed to be studied, and then it did not release it, though the Prime Minister's own chief economic advisor has said recently that it should be released. What is happening in India is that bad news is being ignored and not being addressed. You can't really fix a problem if you don't think it's there. So what is happening in India is that these numbers that I've read out to you are not secret numbers that nobody knows. This is all publicly available data, but it's just that we don't have a discussion on this because it's seen to be the case that the economy is doing really well under Mr. Modi, and that is what will be believed. Now, some of this has been exacerbated by the pandemic. It is true that you could argue that the government of India was not particularly competent in the way that the pandemic was handled. We didn't, though we have some of the largest manufacturing capacities of pharma in this country, we chose not to place advance orders for the vaccine. The government declared victory over the pandemic, I think it was in March this year, where it congratulated the Prime Minister for having done a very good job. This was just before the second wave. What has happened is that in India, of a population of about 100 and just short of 140, 1.4 billion, more than half the population is now living on food which is practically free and given out by the state. So the government gives out to 80 crore people, 800 million people. I'm told the actual number is 830 million, who get every month 5 kilograms of either wheat or rice and 1 kilogram of dal. So this is given out and has been given out since the beginning of the pandemic to more than half of the population, and who sort of line up to take it, which means that they need this food. The government today spends 3 times what it does on Manrega. So Manrega is a program that was begun by the last government, and it dealt with rural unemployment. And what it did was guarantee 100 days of work to a family where one member of the family would get paid a minimum wage. We are spending 3 times as much in 2020. We spent 3 times as much in 2020 as we did in 2013, 2014. So the number of Indians who don't have work and are willing to work any kind of hard labor, even if it's just for 100 days in the year, for minimum wage, has gone up 3x. And the number of people who want to do this work and cannot get it is fairly high as well, though that's not as well documented. India's middle class has shrunk by 3 crore, 32 million people in the last 18 months. So what used to be a fairly small middle class compared to the rest of the population, in any case, has become smaller. The really rich have left India. So 28,000 dollar millionaires, people who own at least 7.5 crore, who own at least 7.5 crore rupees, have gone since 2014. 5,000 of them left last year. In 2017, 73% of the wealth generated in India went to the richest 1%. So you can see parts of this in the stock market, where though companies are, their top line, the sales is less in 2020, 2021 than it was the year before, profits are higher. And the share of profits in GDP has gone up. So it's a classic case of, while the poor are getting poorer, the rich who have the money are making money out of nothing other than just holding on to stock. There are some other things that that I think you should take a look at. I don't want to bore you with too much data, but the consumer durables market in India, which is refrigerators, washing machines, air conditioners, TV sets, and so on, was estimated in 2014 to be worth 150,000 crore rupees by 2020. It was 76,400 crore in 2019, and it was 50,000 crore last year. So 1/3 of what it should have been. I keep referring to 2014 for the reason that this is the time at which we had a new government in India led by Mr. Modi. Though I think that to some extent, and maybe even to a large extent, the decay began before him. I think his contribution is to exacerbate it in some ways through certain policies that we don't need to go into, and to deny that this is happening.
Like 2014 बाट के Indian grow छोड्यो mind के भनेको हैन उले भने Indian mind पनि ब्लक गर्दै भनेको हुन्छ के
Pramod, you may want to mute yourself.
Okay, so
we have like hardly 10 more minutes for your conversation, and then.
Sorry, so
yes.
I've got another 10 minutes.
10 minutes, yeah.
Okay, so wow. So maybe not that much data. The number of people, the total number of passengers has fallen from 840 crore in 2012 to 826 crore in 2019 before the pandemic. The total tons ferried by the railways has remained flat for the last 5 years. Electricity generation has remained flat for the last 3 years. Bank credit has fallen over the last 3 years. So anyway, so to bring this part of the of what I'm saying to a close, the India growth story is over. That we will not become the next China. We will remain where we are for a fairly long time. And given the fact that our government doesn't recognize the decline, we don't have the means to be able to correct this, even if we had the will. The second part, I'll try and run through this as quickly as I can, is the erosion of democracy in India. So India was the standout country in South Asia not to have constitutional majoritarianism. Both in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the president has to be a Muslim. In Maldives, even the legislators in the Majlis have to be Sunnis. Sri Lanka privileges Buddhism in its constitution. Bangladesh's constitution begins with Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Bhutan is probably the most theocratic state in the world, where all the religious and temporal power is held by one man. Nepal till 2008 used to be a Hindu Rashtra, which had like a Kshatriya king as prescribed by Manusmriti, with a Brahmin Mool Purohit in his court. India was the only exception, but that I think internally that was not true. That India was able to avoid overt majoritarianism, and it has subverted the spirit of its constitution through the introduction and the acceleration in the post-2014 period of laws that more or less resemble large parts of South Asia. So Pakistan doesn't have any Hindu chief ministers in its 4 states. India doesn't have any Muslim chief minister in its 28 states. There is no minister at all in 15 states in India. In 10 states, there is one Muslim minister, usually given the minority affairs portfolio, which is also the case at the union government. The BJP's 303 Lok Sabha MPs do not include a single Muslim. In the 2014-2019 Lok Sabha, they had 282 MPs, of which none was a Muslim. I'm told one person in Assam is a Muslim out of its 1,000 MLAs around the country. So this is deliberate exclusion and a political apartheid. So that is what India has done on the side of democratic politics. On the side of the law, we have begun introducing or tightening laws that were already anti-minority in many ways. The cow slaughter in India is ostensibly an economic crime. It is not a religious one. But the sentence for cow slaughter in India is life in some states. In Gujarat, it is life. The burden of proof is reversed. So if you are accused of having meat in your fridge, it is up to you to prove to the state that that meat is not a beef. And if you can't prove that, you go off to jail, which has happened to people. India has criminalized two things which are actually fundamental rights. So the right to propagate is a fundamental right in India, but you actually don't, because this is what the Christians had asked for in the Constituent Assembly, and they'd been granted this privilege, including by Hindu conservatives who felt that this was something that a modern nation should have. What we have done instead is we have criminalized and we have taken away the freedom to convert. So if you want to convert your faith in India, you have to fill out a form, send it to a magistrate, giving your reasons, your age, your monthly income, your caste, where you live, who you're calling to the ceremony that you plan to have. The person who wants to convert you also has to fill out the form. The government will determine whether or not it will let you convert. And data out of Gujarat says that about half the people who fill out these forms are told no. You might be familiar with the UAPA law, under which the government can denote any buddy terrorist, any individual terrorist. Previously, the law allowed the government to determine what organizations could be listed as terror ones, but now it can point out to anybody who may not have done anything, but the government suspects will do something in the future, and jail them pretty much indefinitely, as we are seeing in the case of the Bhima Koregaon 16, one of whom died while he was in custody. The targeting of minorities has increased after 2015, when the Prime Minister pushed for laws on beef, and lynchings began. We had not seen the phenomenon of beef lynchings in this country. So there's data which says that 97% of all the violence linked to beef and 100% of all the deaths, murders linked to beef have come after 2015. Okay. The last point I want to make here is that there has been, politically speaking, because India remains a democracy, we can gauge what the public sentiment is in response to what is going on. And I think that if we have a spectrum where you've got approval on one end and disapproval on one end and sort of disinterest in the middle, it seems to be that the people of India either approve of what the BJP is doing through the laws, or they have a lack of interest. There certainly doesn't seem to be too much pushback, and that I can't see any disapproval, and nor can other scholars who have looked at this phenomenon. That was my piece on India. For the future, I don't know how long I have, but I'll start, and in case you want to shut me off, please do so. We have less control over the next 25 years. So two things are happening, broadly speaking, in this vector. One is that automation is upon us at a speed which most people think will lead to human level intelligence in the next quarter century or so. These are people who are already researching artificial intelligence. And while it has been the case that mechanization around the world has not replaced as many jobs as was feared, say, 100 years ago, what is happening now is that we are replacing the human mind, which is a whole other level of bringing in something which will actually disrupt. We use the word disrupt far too lightly. Lots of lives are disrupted, but I think that this is one area where we don't have that long in South Asia, especially in India, to be able to correct ourselves. If the world is able to manage reaching in 25 years, which is what, 2046, yes. The world is able to possess technologies that replace humans, you will not have work ever for this gigantic population which is now currently going through a crisis in any case. So that is one of the issues I see, not just for us here in India, but also for Pakistan, Afghanistan, for Nepal, Bhutan. I'm not sure about, because they seem to be much more aligned with the globe's vision for a greener future than the rest of us. Bangladesh appears to be doing better than us, but to what extent, how much, and how long it can sustain the advantages it has, I don't know. Bangladesh lost, I think it was last year, its a privileged access to the West for garment exports. So it might not be as easy to replicate what it has done in growth over the next decade or so. On automation, I think also another point is that the way that the world transports itself, electric cars and so on, South Asia is behind. It will need to develop technologies or become a colony. If we don't have the ability to be able to replicate what is going on either in South Korea in terms of chips, or in China in terms of batteries, or in the US in terms of self-driving cars. So on all three aspects of what constitutes the next 25 years of growth in the auto industry, which is already stagnant in India, as we've seen, we are behind. On climate change, I think we are going through the last phase where the powerful countries of the world will allow nations to pollute. I think that the idea that because you polluted the world 75 years ago, I have the right to do it now, will probably not hold good as an argument for too long. So the dominant fuel in India is coal. I don't know how long we'll be able to use that without the rest of the world breathing down our necks. It's a serious problem. Lastly, this is slightly strange, but I think that one of the developments in the US and China especially is the race to space. So the race to space ended shortly after 69, when the US went to the moon, and then the last US rockets to go to the moon were in 72. No humans have gone back since. And then a sort of loss of interest from the public led to a cut in the NASA budget. It appears now that space race is now back on. So there are people trying to colonize Mars, trying to get rockets that will mine asteroids and bring off-Earth materials and try and increase their wealth. We don't have any stake in this. So we have a space program. Nobody else in South Asia does, but it's a very limited one, which doesn't have too much technological capacity. The last point I want to make is the role of the individual over the next 25 years. We'll be living in states, at least I will be, where economic growth is poor, the number of unemployed people is very high. Crime has already been rising since 2014. I didn't read the data out on that one, but it's there in my next book, which is out in November. And we'll be living a sort of fairly unsecure lives, and we'll be very dependent on the state, a state which already doesn't have much power and whose power might reduce given the rise and the wealth of the global corporations that are able to influence it. So overall, the picture appears to be that India will flatten and decline in terms of its trajectory as a global power. It will not replicate China. It will go through the same period, internally speaking, and is going through, actually, I should say, that the rest of South Asia went through, especially Pakistan, our twin brother, in terms of a polity that is aimed essentially at persecuting minorities more than anything else. And lastly, we will not have at the level of the individual the kind of freedoms and options that will be available to many other parts of the world.
We have 10 more minutes for, sorry. We have 10 more minutes for Q&A. So if you want to wrap it up in like...
I'm done.
Okay. So it was really enlightening. At the same time, the future seems too bleak. So there are a couple of questions in the chat, but before that, I just want to ask you, I mean, you just exposed us to a very realistic picture of, what's happening in India, many things that we don't think about many times. But how can we rectify it at this point? You said that a majority of people are, probably in the disinterested kind of a section, than, not really giving a pushback to many things or thinking about these things. So how can we make our future better for India?
So I'd say two things. One is what we could be doing, and one is whether I think we will do it. So what we could be doing is two things. One is, I think, uh, we should recognize that there is a problem in the South Asian model, and I'm talking here of the economy. That none of us, with possibly the exception of Lanka, which has done much better on human development indicators and so on, has been able to do what went on in, say, Southeast Asia. We tend to congratulate ourselves for our democratic states, which is very good. But I think that on the issue of how do you bring hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and sort of get them a dignified life, we failed. If we could recognize that, that would be good. But that will not happen. I think we don't have, at least I don't live in a country where the ruling party and particularly a very deified leader will say, okay, I think we're in trouble and let's try and find a way out of it. That's one. The other is that you reach out to your sisters when you have a crisis. I think that being the largest member of SAARC, we should have had something over the last 50 years, and I'm not blaming this government alone, of trying to unify the geography of South Asia, at least in trade terms. But we can't travel freely to Pakistan. Pakistanis can't come here freely. And reciprocity, negative reciprocity is the policy which we have with Pakistan. Bangladesh, you've heard what our Home Minister refers to their citizens as, he called them termites. So I don't think the blockade of Nepal by the Modi government was, I think, quite vicious and should not have happened in 2015. But there is not much recognition that India could play a larger role here and do something slightly more positive. And I think given that fact that we haven't recognized it for 50 years, I doubt whether we're going to do it in the next 5. So I'm skeptical that we have the capacity to be able to do a sort of course correction, because we seem to be lacking a capacity even for honest appraisal.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that was helpful. So there's a question in the chat. I'm sure it's a common question, but still, there's a rise of Modi in India, Xi in China, Putin in Russia, Trump and Trumpism in America, and conservative communists, Oli in Nepal. So how do you see it? How do you look at it? Is the rise of these extremism around the world? What is your reasoning, or how do we address it?
I haven't studied the linkages, but I would be surprised if there was anything that was common to them. I think that China has reached a period where it is unable to grow at the 10% rate which it could a decade ago. So internally, the government would have figured out that nationalism is a good way to be able to address whatever pressures are coming from below. Putin has been in power much longer than the others, and he goes back 2 decades. Trump, but for I think 1 or 2 states, might not have come to power. The fact is, he remains extremely popular, but he had fewer votes than Clinton did, and it might have been the case that he might not have won at all. Modi is, I think, not surprising at all. I think that India, for the longest part of its history, has chosen not to be a majoritarian. Whenever there is an anti-Muslim pogrom in this country, the chief minister gets replaced. That's been the history since 1969 when we had our first major one. So nobody who presides over mass violence, whether taking part in it or not being able to stop it, has remained in power in India except for Mr. Modi. Not only did he remain in power after the massacre of 1,000 Gujaratis on his watch in 2002, he was able to come back to power 3 times after that and then became the prime minister. The Congress party, which has its problems, has never overtly pushed the majoritarianism that the BJP did. It is very easy to politically mobilize large numbers if you hate on a minority community. That is the reality of our country. If you target viciously, physically, negatively a particular community that is not yours, there is political benefit to be had from this. And the BJP has reaped this. So I can't quite remember what the question was that led me to.
No, this is good. I'll just ask a quick follow-up question from. It's like, is BJP the sole reason, or is BJP the product, just a mere product of a conservative Indian, who is kind of appeasing these?
No, majority it is the norm in South Asia. We are all people who are bigots at heart. We might not think of ourselves as being that, but I think that in a country of 1.3 billion, where you've got systemic violence that is being engendered against a community, there is very little pushback from the media, from the polity. Even the opposition politicians who mean well, they don't want to get into it too much because they would be seen as being pro-Muslim, whatever that means. So I think that the both in terms of the realism with which we have to approach this and the future that we face is, I think, staring us in the face.
So another question is Pegasus really a new phenomena? Because Americans have been violating privacy of public every day and so on. And what is your take on it?
So I think that there are two things. One is, are you doing something within a legal framework? Two is whether you're doing something which is moral and it is ethical, or is it borderline a criminal? So I'll give you two examples. If you have a woman who accuses the Chief Justice of India of sexual harassment and her family's phones are targeted, I don't think that's a national security issue. If you're targeting journalists who are openly dissenting of your government, I don't think that is a national security issue. If you're targeting the leader of the opposition, how is that a national security issue? So while it is true that every state uses the technology that is available to it to subvert privacy, to be intrusive, what is happening here is a criminal, I would say. And that is why we see that the government of India is being so evasive in not replying to a yes/no question, did you use Pegasus?
So you mentioned a lot about, the economy and how, our statistics show that we are flat or declining and so on, right? So, like from a human rights point of view, would if you look at Pinochet in Chile or, Putin in Russia, they've brought some kind of economic stability at the cost of course, civil and political rights. So sometimes you hear people justifying, saying that, hey, South Asia, human rights is kind of a luxury, we have to focus on economics. Of course, we are not focusing on both. But how would you deal with such questions?
I don't know if Putin would actually fall under that categorization, because I think in the last decade or so, the Russian economy has not done well because of the price of oil mostly.
But he brought stability after Yeltsin, for quite some time.
If you look at the various indices, if you look at nations that tend to score well on the democracy indices, also tend to be the ones which have both wealthier citizens, lesser inequality, and lesser violence. I think that for us to ignore the Nordic countries and Western Europe and look at China or Singapore and Russia and say that maybe we should try what they are doing, because that's a very small number of nations. You've got more than, 2.5 dozen nations sitting in Europe that are doing well, where you want to be, but you cannot be because you neither have what they have in terms of rule of law and human rights, nor do you have what they have in terms of the economy. You want the latter, we want the latter, but not the former. But I'm saying that there seems to be very few routes that lead to economic prosperity for large nations, except through the rights space. If you empower your population, that is what will make you a big economic power.
Do you have hope in our youth? Because India has like a huge youth population. Do you feel, they would probably dissipate some of this ethno-national, ethnocentric sentiments or religious passions?
Well, I don't think that they are very different from the rest of us. So it would be unfair for us to expect them to come and save us from the mess that we have made for ourselves. Secondly, they might not have enough time. I think that we are at a point in history which is an inflection in many ways. We don't have that much in front of us to run. Our takeoff space is not as much as it was there a century or half a century ago. Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, even China, which is the last big country to come out of it, it had that runway where it could go through the classical phase of low-end manufacturing, assembly, and then light industrial products, automobiles, and then semiconductor and all that. We don't have that space. We've got 800 million people line up for free food every month. Where at what point will that change and you have jobs for these people? I don't know, and nobody knows. We just assume that things will change on their own. There is no plan on the ground which says that we will be different in 2030. There is not even recognition of the fact that we are here today.
So how can we enlighten the people and empower people to do that?
Not in a democracy, people should look around them and vote in the way that they want to and talk about the right things. I don't think any particular party is going to get us out of this, but at least the recognition of where we are and where we are going and where we have been in the last 10 years is required. And I don't see that. And I don't see that happening.
I think a last question from the audience is like, can we see the success of a third front in the next general election, given that the principal opposition is weak and in kind of a mess? Can you see a steady economic growth in the coming years, given the state of, I think you already answered that. But
yeah, I don't know what the in India, two things matter. I think one is what kind of mobilization and money you have. What are the issues that you have? They matter more than they do in sort of other countries, because a lot of voters will show up at the booth if you give them the cash. So I think the fact that the BJP has about 80-85% of all of the political cash in this country means that they have a native advantage there. The other part is there doesn't seem to be any resistance either to the ethnological damage that we are doing to our country, the majoritarianism, and that doesn't appear, at least at the moment. I could be wrong, over the next couple of years, I don't know. Over the economic damage, Nehru and Indira Gandhi kept coming back to power when the economy was growing at 3% a year, and people didn't seem to have a problem with that. So I don't know why it should be that somebody who's 21 years old today should feel differently. We've always been a very poor nation. So what has changed now? I mean, I don't know. I don't see the opposition. I would not be surprised if Mr. Modi won a third term.
Do we lack? I think we have only 1 minute, right, Pramod? So just one quick, if you can just quickly say that why did we fail to kind of come together coherently at the South Asian consortium like ASEAN and so on?
Because I think the largest party in the mix didn't have the will to be able to unite it. As is often said, the only country in South Asia that has a border with all the other countries is actually India. Pakistan doesn't share a border with Bangladesh, or with Nepal, and so on. So it was incumbent on India. Maybe I'm being a bit too sort of unfair and harsh on my own country, but it seems to be the case that the largest and most dominant player didn't see the need to be able to do much, and therefore it didn't, and so it was left to stagnate. And here we are in 2021.
Thank you so much, Mr. Patel. That was really enlightening. And the fact that we have people like you who is kind of pointing out or, showing a torch to people towards a dark tunnel and saying, watch out and open your eyes. Hopefully it will open many eyes and kind of, bring an optimistic future for our country. So I think I would like to end it with a positive note and hoping that people like Mr. Aakar Patel would kind of pave a path that many youngsters and others would take, and slowly, gradually, steadfastly, we will probably reach to a positive future, better future.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you also to NICE.
Distinguished Chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we have come to the end of this session, we would like to express a sincere gratitude and thanks to the Chair for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. Our sincere thanks also goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such comprehensive and convincing presentations. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, we must also mention our deep sense of appreciation for the audience who participated in the webinar and those who are watching us live. Thank you for your valuable time and attention, and for making this session productive with your questions. Once again, we are truly honored to have you all with us today. Please do join us in the next session. Thank you so much.